So this year's Ekklesia, we're joined by Dr. Sarah Holmes from Liverpool Hope University. Welcome, Sarah.
Thank you, pleasure to be here.
Do you want to share what your role is at Liverpool Hope University?
Absolutely, yeah. Well, I teach early childhood, that's my main part of my job, but I also get to spend a third of my time researching children and family faith and how we can, as churches and organisations, support children and families in nurturing that faith. So I absolutely love it, it's great.
So there's so many things that you could be researching. Why are you researching that specific area?
Well, for a long time, ever since I was about 12, I've been involved in helping various different children's activities and things. And I think for me, what I find really fascinating is that often as churches, we're so good at pressing on and keeping going and pushing through all adversities and things. But actually, I think it's good sometimes to pause and reflect and stop and look and say, how could we tweak and improve and develop these things? So I love researching this because I find people are quite open and honest because I'm slightly outside the church context. So they're often willing to perhaps be a bit more honest and so on about things. But also I think, I hope by asking some of these questions and raising some of these awareness of some of these things, it just helps churches and organisations to reflect and to improve and enhance the amazing work that they're doing.
So we're working on this new research right now together, but do you think that generally over the last couple of years, you found that churches and Christian parents are on the same page?
Well, it's really interesting. We did some research in June last year across a few different contexts, America, Canada, Brazil, and here as well. And we asked that very question, what do churches and parents think? And it was really fascinating to see because when we said, to churches, what do you think families want coming out of the pandemic? The vast majority said, we think families want reconnection, they want support, being valued and listened to, but specifically support for growing faith in their own home. And parents were saying similar things. And yet when we looked at what the activities were of what were actually happening, what churches were actually doing and putting the time and energy and so on into, there was quite a mismatch. So although they were saying, we think families want support for faith in the home and so on, it was really interesting that there was quite a mismatch there. And only 1% actually of parents said they wanted the church to take complete responsibility for nurturing their child's faith. The others wanted support, reinforcement, advice, and that sort of thing. And I think that's really important for us to be kind of looking at. When we looked at a lot of the responses people were giving, there was very little language about collaboration and working together and partnership. There was very much this kind of service provider type mentality. I go to church, they will give me what I need for my family, and we'll move on. And that sort of, I think, is quite a disconnection really, and I think there is a bit of a mismatch of what's going on at the moment.
So if then Christian parents want churches to help them parent for faith in the home, what should local churches be doing practically? What might that look like?
I think a lot of it is what is visible and what is prioritised in a visible kind of way. And so a lot of what we've been hearing is that coming out of the pandemic time, of course, in the pandemic, it was an awful time, really challenging time, difficult time, but particularly for those working with children and families, I think. And as we're coming out of that time, there's a lot of talk from various churches, families and so on about actually, is that ministry being kind of minimised, slightly marginalised, and actually adult ministry perhaps being prioritised in these times when we've got limited energy, limited volunteers and so on. And so I think actually from the front of church, in the midst of everything that we're doing, to be talking about the value of working with families, talk about the value of parents and what they can do in the home. There was one church leader who recently said to me, I couldn't believe what I heard. Somebody said, don't worry, parents, your child's faith is in safe hands at our church. You don't need to do a thing. And how frustrating that was to hear, because actually, if you think as a parent, then they think, that's nothing, I've got no job in that, no part to play in that. And how disempowering that is. Yet the flip side, if we can empower parents and talk at the front about, let's pray, just for a minute, let's spend a minute praying, you know, for parents this week as they're grappling with their children about issues like war, or, you know, things that are going on at the moment. How can we empower those parents and speak into their the ethos, really, of how that's important? And I think also some things like giving really little opportunities. For me, unfortunately, as a parent, I'm not very creative, and I don't do well with sticky tape and all that kind of thing. So if kind of loads of craft activities are sent home, I'm not good at that. But just a little question that we can talk about as a family and say, you know, how have you seen God working this week? I can do that. I can find 5 minutes in my week to sit down and talk to my kids about that. So I think giving them easy opportunities of things to do, as well as raising the profile and the visibility of how important and how valuable parents are, and family ministry is. I think that's so crucial.
So how do you think over the last 2 years during the pandemic it's really impacted faith in home? Has it been challenged, or has it actually grown during the last 2 years?
Well, it's really exciting, actually. We looked at this. We said to parents, I was just going to try and find the statistics here, and we said, you know, what has happened in the pandemic, and it was fascinating. 32% of families said that their spiritual activity at home had decreased, but over 50% said that it had increased, it had been enhanced, it had grown, the spiritual activity that was happening in the home. And so really exciting, you know, this is a real gift, a real opportunity coming out of the pandemic, that actually over half of the Christian families that we spoke to have increased what they're doing in the home. And that's amazing. And I think if we as a church can hear that and be aware of that and respond to that and say, great, how can we build on this? You know, there were some things being reported about, there's more intentional time families are now giving to children's worship or worshiping as a family, more conversation just as part of daily life, and spiritual talk together and so on. So that, I think, is amazing. So I'm aware there's probably families where the opposite is true, but if we can as a church capitalize on that situation that's happened, that's an amazing opportunity.
And so I guess in this phase now, as we begin to create new rhythms and new routines for how we do church going forwards, what kind of strategies should churches be thinking about in terms of actually really helping their young kids in their church to really have a faith that flourishes?
So it's interesting that you mentioned the word strategy there, because when we did this multinational research, we found that less than 2% of churches had a formal vision or strategy for children and family ministry. And we just found that staggering, that the vast majority didn't. So 68% came out and said, no, we absolutely don't. And the remainder were saying, well, we're just trying to work it out. We're just thinking what to do. We need to see if we've got money first. We need to talk about it at the PCC or the leadership team first. And we were really surprised by this. And many of the responses from churches were saying, well, we do a Sunday school, that's our strategy. Or we do a kids club, that's our strategy. But we were saying, well, actually, you know, what is the strategy? What are you trying to achieve? And I think that what we've just been talking about in the last few minutes about churches capitalizing on where families are and what the needs of families are and so on, I think we need to be a bit more intentional as the church to say, right, you know, what are the needs of families and children in this time? And how can we develop a specific intentional strategy to meet those needs? That might mean we don't do it quite what we've done before. Perhaps we don't focus on the Sunday school or this or that or the other, and each of our contexts will be different. But I think that's what we need when we're trying to form a strategy. We need to say, right, what are the needs of those around us in our area, in our locality, in our church, those on the periphery of our church, those outside our church, and how can we be very intentional to target and meet those needs and to reflect, you know, what we've done before may not be the best thing for this next season. So I think that is a real area for churches to grapple with and to think, actually, let's try and be a bit more organized and have a bit more of a formal strategy and vision and get our minds on what are we wanting to achieve in terms of children and family ministry in this season.
So as churches begin to think then about these having this plan, this strategy for engaging with families and kids, what are some of the barriers and perhaps some of the challenges?
Well, we all know, don't we, about time and energy. I think that's one of the biggest barriers in life generally, and even more so in the church. And that is a barrier. And I think that actually highlights even more so where we should be aiming our work and our ministry is, rather than perhaps going for approaches which need huge numbers of people. If we don't have those people who are willing to be involved, perhaps we need to evaluate and say, well, how can we perhaps change what we're doing? Which again, thinking about strategy for family ministry, I think that's really exciting, because if we don't have, 10, 20 people in our churches to run the kids' work, perhaps we could think, how could we run it as a family work instead? Slightly change and shift our focus, where then we don't need as many team, and actually we can empower as part of that the parents and get them involved in what we're doing. But one thing which is coming through time and time again as we discuss this issue with churches and children's workers, family workers, parents, everyone, is whose job is it? Whose role is it to work with families? Because often that is given to children's workers, those who volunteer on the children's team and various things. And there's quite a discussion about actually what is the role of church leadership in that. And many children's leaders, children's workers, family workers are finding there's a bit of a difficulty to kind of break into that discussion with church leadership, whether that's PCC meetings, or whatever it is in your different context, to actually work together with the leadership to say we need to evaluate and change what we've been doing rather than keep going on the track we've always done. And so I do think, in this time that we're in now, that I think those discussions at that kind of high church leadership level are so important. Firstly, to be listening as a church leadership, what is going on in our church community. One church I saw gave some kids a video camera, and they asked them to basically film what happened on a Sunday, and it was so interesting to see, because all you could see was the people's backs, people's bums, they couldn't quite hear what was going on at the front. There was just that kind of thing. And to actually sit there and think from a child's point of view, what is the experience in our church? Do we actually talk to children, or do they just have to entertain themselves while we're busy doing whatever we're doing? And so I think really evaluating at that church leadership level is one of the biggest barriers and difficulties, but also opportunities that we have at the moment. Thinking how many people are involved in adult, perhaps focused ministry, and how many people are involved in children focused ministry. We're finding that perhaps there's a bit more of a priority being given in terms of energy and participation and so on to adult focused ministry than there is to children and family ministry at the moment. And I don't think that's an intentional thing. I don't think churches are sitting there saying, we don't value children, we don't want children. I think it's the opposite. They do value and they do want, but I think our existing structures perhaps are creating a barrier, because without us realizing that's what we're conveying and so on. So I think that to me is the biggest kind of barrier that we have at the moment in terms of this.
Brilliant. That was great to hear from Dr. Sarah Holmes. Okay, Gareth, where's Gareth? Gareth, come up. This is Gareth Hillier. Let's give him a round of applause. Gareth's been around the last couple of days. And Gareth, tell us what you're involved in, something called the Kitchen Table Project. But could you kind of unpack that? What is that? What does that mean? What is that?
Yeah. So the Kitchen Table Project is part of Care for the Family. I am sure many of you are very aware of Care for the Family. As an organisation, we really believe in strengthening families. And through various work we do, we equip and support churches to very much work with families, both within the church and outside the church. But the Kitchen Table Project is really looking at what Dr. Sarah Holmes was saying there, looking at how do we equip and support parents within the church to really make the most of the opportunities that exist at home. We at the Kitchen Table Project really believe that there is so much potential and so much importance on the spiritual development of children, and much of that can happen at home. But it's looking at how can we join the dots between church and home so that parents don't feel isolated in this journey or feel overwhelmed. But really, we look at how we can equip and empower so they realize that they can do this, that they are equipped.
So tell us, what are some of the things? Give us a couple of examples. What can parents do?
Yes.
So what does that look like?
Yes. So I think the good news is one of our biggest messages is around this idea of making the most of the everyday moments. I don't know about you, but life is busy. And for many parents and carers, the idea of standing in front of them and suddenly going, you are the biggest influences on your child's faith, now get on with it, that freaks them out. Yeah. That overwhelms them. And straight away we go to, well, I must recreate church, or I must make this perfect Instagrammable moment. And then we try it and it doesn't work out. And we get disappointed and we think, oh, forget that. I'm just going to leave it to the experts in the church. But the reality is, there are so many opportunities that exist in the everyday moments. And we really love that scripture in Deuteronomy 6, verse 6 to 8, I think it is. And it really, why we love that is because the things that Moses is saying to teach your children is the everyday things. It's walking down the road. It's when you get up. It's when you go to bed. So what we say to churches and to parents and carers, it is about identifying those everyday moments, and God is big enough and wants to be involved in every aspect, not just the moments where we're in church, but actually when we're watching Peppa Pig together, or when we're eating together, or when we're walking to school. So that is the biggest thing, is helping parents realize that God can and wants to be involved in those everyday moments. So it's about equipping them and giving them the confidence of going, okay, how can we make the most of those opportunities? And then I suppose another practical thing in there is a big part of my role is working with churches and denominations to really look at how do we equip and engage with families around this idea. And when I sit down with church leaders especially, the first thing they say to me is, how do we do this? And I get that. I'm a church leader myself. Yeah. We want to go straight to the how. Give me a ready-made formula so I can put it in place in my church so I can equip the families. And I get that. But the reality is every family is different. Every family is unique. So what I often say is, there's a how. We've got great resources. There are great resources out there. And you probably do amazing things for your family. That's great. But we could put on the greatest resources and events, but if we don't rewind one step to the why, then the reality is parents and carers are not going to do much. So how can we help families realize their why? Why is this important? So 2 very quick questions that I often say to churches to ask parents and carers on this journey, and we've got an Inspire session which helps with this conversation. And the 2 questions is simple to parents and carers. First one is, why is your faith important to you as a parent or carer? And then the second one, why is it important that your child develops a faith that lasts? And I often find when you start sitting down and slowing it down and going, let's look at the why. Why is this important? Why do we do things on a Sunday? How can we, in the things we do on a Sunday, how does that help the parents we work with discover and build upon their why? So the how is really important. Yeah. But I think we also, as church leaders, need to look at the why. Why is it important? Why do we want to support and equip parents and carers? Yeah. So I would just really say, let's look at the why as well as the how as well.
Brilliant. Brilliant. Just one final question, Gareth. So you're a church leader.
Yes.
As well as working on the Kitchen Table project. So give us like one example of something that you've shifted or changed as a church leader, taken on board your role with Kitchen Table project. Something that you've maybe done differently, or something that's changed from your understanding of the importance of the home, the importance of family. Something that's changed, something that you've shifted or moved on over the last couple of years.
Two very quick things. We realized that we like the idea of being a family church in principle, but the reality is that does not look like a family church. We love the idea of the name over the name of the church going, we are a family church. But you look at all our programs, you look at how we do church. The reality is we were a church with lots of kids and lots of parents and carers. That doesn't make this whole idea of family church. So what we wanted to look at, how do we come and journey alongside parents and carers? And 2 of the practical things we looked at, we started looking at where we spend a lot of our money, and the second thing, we look at where we spend a lot of our time. So small groups were really important to us as a church. We had a goal that 100% of the people who called our church home were going to be in small groups. But we put small groups on at 8 o'clock at night. Yeah. The reality is that doesn't work for every single person. Yeah. So one of the things we now do is do small groups for families. Brilliant. And do you know what? It looks messy. It's chaos. But the great thing is God can do something with chaos, can't he? Yeah. So we've been challenged to look at how do we really come alongside parents and not just expect them to have all the answers, but to really take the time to go, okay, what do you need? Not us just dictate everything, but actually the biggest thing as a parent I need is not another sermon. I love preaching sermons, but it's an arm around the shoulder and go, do you know what? It's tough right now, but there's still hope. You're still equipped. You're still called to be the parent of your 2 young children. Yeah. Even when I look at myself, parents are great at feeling guilty, aren't we? Yeah. So actually, how can we as the church look at our role? We are positioned to help coach parents and carers on this journey. So I think, just to answer that question, changing our role as the church is we don't have to have all the answers. Yeah. We don't have to put on all the greatest programs and events, and I love programs and events. Yeah. But there's also a role of actually how are we positioned to help parents and carers on this adventure and journey of actually discipling their children. Brilliant. And that changes our role slightly in a coaching role in that.
Brilliant. I did say last question, but I've got one more before you're going to have a chance to chat on your tables. Just, I think when you hear Kitchen Table Project, you hear family, I immediately think 12 and under.
Yeah.
So what about, what kind of would you suggest, or what about the teenagers? Because teenagers still in our homes. Yes. There's still that, and some people may feel they've missed the boat, you know, but they've got teenagers still in the home. So any just quick thoughts on that? Because I think sometimes we hear Kitchen Table Project, we hear family, and we think, well, I do anyway, 12 and under. Yeah. You know, and you think after that it's lost, or it's a youth worker. Yeah. You know, or I'm just praying on my knees and hoping. Yeah. So just any quick thoughts on that in terms of like teenagers and family being not just children, but that broader, wider thing.
Yeah, and I think the great news on that is, and all the time when we're working with parents is, there's not a lost cause. There's not a missed opportunity, whether your child is 12 or 32. Do you know what I mean? The prayer is really powerful. But when it comes to teenagers, we really believe that there are 5 key elements that build faith, and you can see it on the stand. But one of the ones which I think is especially important for young people is the whole idea of belonging. Belonging is really, really important. And actually, how can we create those opportunities for young people to belong? And then the second one is this: be real. And I think young people especially, they want authenticity. Yeah. Do you really believe what you say you believe? Yeah. And the reality is, as a church leader, I can betray something, but my kids see the best and the worst of me. Yeah. So actually helping parents and carers, whether it's a child or a young person, the reality is, right now, the world is chaotic. Yeah. But actually, how can we help parents model that whole thing of authentic, genuine faith? And do you know what? Young people won't always admit it, but they're watching all the time. Yeah. So actually, just helping parents go, all right, their behavior or their actions might say one thing, but God is still doing something in their heart. So don't lose hope. Keep modeling, keep being real, keep praying, keep creating that safe space to belong. And do you know what? Let's trust God. God is in control in that. But that's the thing. There is no lost cause. Because we read the research, and one of the bits of the research, we see the importance of building faith into children at a young age. Yeah. So sometimes we see, oh, well, my child's 12, so what's the point now? Yeah. But there is still a point. And actually, what I love about those 5 things, 5 elements that build faith, they're just really simple foundations I want to build into my family, even when my kids leave my home. Yeah. Because the reality of a safe space, belonging, being real, that's going to benefit everyone, whether it's my children or just my wife and whoever else lives with us in the future.
Brilliant.